The gentleman from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we gather to honor Martin Luther King Jr., and there's much we could say, but I thought it might be appropriate to actually read some of his own words from one of his early sermons. Can I have permission to read an excerpt from one of his sermons?
Please continue.
This is from the King sermon entitled Man's Sin and God's Grace. It was delivered in the late 1950s before King had reached national prominence, but I think it reflects the philosophy that carried him forward into the work that he did in later years. Man is a sinner. That is one of the basic facts of the universe and one of the basic facts of life. Now, we've tried to get away from this in the modern world. We hate this word, sin. We run from it. We try to talk about it in other terms. This is one of the weaknesses of religious liberalism, that in throwing out certain traditional concepts, which it should have thrown out, liberalism fell then to the danger that forever confronts any new view. It became sentimental and soft, feeling that man was evolving from a lower state to a higher state, and eventually he would throw off all the evils and sin in his nature. But even after all that, man is still a sinner. We face the new psychology. It furnishes us with a lot of words and phrases to explain certain weaknesses in human nature. So we very easily dismiss the word sin, and we start talking about phobias and inhibitions, and we reach over to Freudian psychology and say it's a conflict between the id and the superego. But when man's through talking in terms of all this bombastic phrasing, he discovers that he is still a sinner. Sin grows even worse when we go out into the social dimensions of it, when we pass from the personal to the social. That's when sin becomes really tragic. You know, individuals devoid of society are much more moral, much more rational, and much more good than society itself. But it's because man is caught in society that he becomes an even greater sinner. It's very seldom that a man by himself will lynch anybody, but a mob will lynch somebody. That is why one theologian can write a book entitled Moral Man and Immoral Society. The real tragedy of man's social and collective existence is the fact that sin is almost inescapable in it. I was talking with a man the other night who was saying to me that he refused to pay income taxes because the nation uses such taxes for wars. And I was sympathetic to his view. But I said to him, you haven't solved the problem, because by refusing to pay income tax, you are just putting greater tax burdens on your brother. And you cannot refuse to pay taxes because you drove your car down here from Ohio and you had to buy gas. And every time you bought gas, you were paying some taxes on that gas. And you were helping to support war even while you bought gas. This is the tragedy of collective and social life, that man never gets out of sin because he's caught in society. If we stop there, I assure you, we would be in a pretty tragic predicament. That man's life would be a life of nothingness, a life of endless pessimism. So we can't stop there. And that's something of the beauty of the Christian faith. It says that in the midst of man's tragic predicament, in the midst of his awful inclination towards sin, God has come into the picture and done something about it. It says that standing over and against the tragic dimensions of man's sin is the glorious dimension of God's grace. God's grace stands over man's sin. Grace is not just some passing phrase, not just some old concept that we should be ashamed to use now. It has a very vital place in understanding the whole predicament of man, the whole predicament of the universe. For you can never understand life until you understand the meaning of grace. It's a gift that we don't merit, that we don't deserve, but we so desperately need. That's grace, and none of us could live without it. A great sermon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.